Hi, and welcome to episode 138 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tariq.
And I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. And this is one of a special series of episodes where we're looking behind the curtain in the publishing industry, speaking to editors, speaking to agents, speaking to even Hollywood managers to try and find out how to attract these people once you've written that brilliant manuscript. And we've spoken to a couple of commissioning editors in the past couple of episodes, so please do check those out. But today we're speaking to a different kind of editor, a developmental editor.
Yeah, David Downing is a developmental editor. So he's the kind of guy who comes in, once your book's been picked up by a publisher, what's the process there? There's an editing process that your book will go through, and he's someone who will come in and look at your story and say, where's the cliches, where's the...
How can we speed this bit up, get to the point more quickly? Yeah, so it's a really interesting chat, and actually he worked with you.
Yeah, David's a really good editor, and I've worked with him a number of times on my books, and he is a great guy at really finding what your story needs and pulling out the little minutiae of details, where maybe the plot's falling a little bit flat, where it needs to punch up a little bit, and he's having that overview of your book when you're so close to it is a really invaluable tool.
Yeah, it's something that everyone struggles with. So having another set of eyes,
and totally,
someone that's a professional at it obviously helps massively. Yeah. He does do it privately as well as for the publishing houses as well. So we'll put a link to his services as well in the podcast description. But we hope you find it a useful episode. We'll get straight to the interview with David now.
So on with the podcast.
So if this was one of our normal podcasts, then what I would say is, did you always want to be a writer? But I mean, did you always, or how did you come into being a developmental editor?
Yeah, I came into it through writing, and so I've always, I started writing fiction when I was probably 12 years old, and went at it pretty hard. I started out in journalism in college, and I was just a terrible journalistic writer. I couldn't write about things that I wasn't excited by and interested in, and you could tell. And so I switched, became an English literature major, did that, got my undergraduate degree, and then just went off and knocked around and worked in libraries and mainly that. And then I after about 10 years or 8 years, I applied to graduate school, an MFA program at University of Washington, and went through that, and as part of that, I was able to teach undergrads. Started out teaching them, composition courses to help offset my tuition, and then I started teaching in University of Washington Extension, so nighttime courses to adults. There's one of them got sick or quit or whatever, and so I, with no notice, I got thrown into teaching nighttime courses, and really liked that a lot. The people are really choose to be there, and they're grown-ups, and I most like teaching introduction to literary fiction writing was my thing, because I could certainly tell people how to start going about being a writer, and so I appreciated that mindset, and while I was there, I continued on doing that, and then that was just when distance learning was starting, and so I developed the distance learning version of, and that was all online, of that course, and I taught that for like 4 or 5 years, and found I liked that even more, because I didn't have it's not stage fright exactly, but I was also working a day job during those days, and then I'd go teach at night. And if I was kind of burnt out, the class didn't go. It's all, it's gotta, people feel your weakness, and and so, but if it was all online, I loved it, and I could be, or go over it until it was closer to my best self. And so I did that for those years. And then we had a child, gave that up, became just a corporate writer for several years, like a marketing writer. A man named Terry Goodman at Amazon Publishing, he had been charged with starting Amazon Publishing, essentially, or a large portion of it. And so he knew that I had this teaching background, and in the beginning, their charge was to get big fast. And so they bought a lot of books and moved them through the pipeline, and they overtaxed their store of contract developmental editors, and that's what I am, independent. And so he, do you want to give this a try? And I said, hell yeah, that sounds perfect. And so that was around 2010, and I've been doing that. I kind of did that and Microsoft for a year, and then made the jump entirely to being a contract developmental editor. And I've been doing that ever since. So it's like 300 books since that time.
Wow.
The early years, it was like they say, the fire hose of books coming at me, which was a really good learning experience for me. So yeah, that's my story, how I got here.
So I mean that's quite a journey there to get where you are now, and where you are right now is, would you describe it as kind of fiction editing or developmental editing? I mean, what exactly does your job entail, I suppose?
Yeah, I just love my job, and I feel really lucky to be able to say that, and for lots of reasons. Basically, yeah, I'm a developmental editor of fiction. What came my way early on was a lot of crime fiction, mystery, suspense stuff. And then at the time they were calling it, well, they're like Oprah books, they hoped, right? And so, and I loved going back and forth between the two, get a change of pace. And, and I also did what they called, and they still, maybe they don't, they call it women's fiction, which I like. there's no bloodshed, there's no explosions. There's just, it's the stuff I like to write about are, kind of regular people having trouble with their families and their loved ones and life in general. And so, and then I got into historical fiction again through Amazon. And then all along I've supplemented, and I need to supplement my work with independent authors. And they come to me through my website, and or referrals from authors that I've worked with. And those books are all over the place, every kind of book, and every level of experience and talent. And my work with all those years of teaching introduction to fiction writing served me well. I don't know if Tariq would agree with this, but I'm not a scorched earth kind of editor. I like to have it feel like a collaboration, and we have 6 weeks or whatever, 8 weeks or whatever it is, to improve this book as much as we can. And so from me, you will get every thought that occurs to me, whether you just get sick of my voice in the call, in the margin. And then I also wander into the text, have track changes on, And from at the very beginning, I mean, I only knew how to do it as either a writer, like in a writing group, or a teacher, instructor. And so I would get right into the text. That's kind of what I need to do, and to sort of demonstrate, well, it seems to me you might want to try something like this. And I was really worried early on that I was being really presumptuous, and I still worry about that constantly, that I'm not wading in to tell you this is what you did wrong and this is the way to do it. I am really trying, rather than trying to laboriously explain myself in the margin or in the editorial letter, I say, look, this, I'll go ahead and demonstrate it and say, you might want to try this. And so that is what people get from me. Basically, I am one more reader, and here is another reader's close response, really engaged, focused response. And so here's your access to another reader's thought processes while they're reading your work. And I know that as a writer, that would be, I would love that, because who knows what goes on in readers.
When you first get a new project, a new manuscript, do you read it over in full first to get a feel, to understand it, and then go back through and start making the edits, or how does it work?
I do, but so I'm a part of what's the Northwest Literary. No, I'm not. The Northwest Editors Guild here in Seattle, and it's like 300 editors, and I went to a conference of theirs, and there was a panel discussion of developmental editors, and so like 5 people up there, and there wasn't one of those 5 that first read it all the way through, and then began weighing in on it, and I was stunned. So one thing I will tell authors is that there's just there's not a single developmental editor's way. And so I am just pretty chatty, and I like to, and I, I'm not feigning it or anything, but I really do always find stuff to be excited about because it's always there. And there are things being done right in the text, and I just kind of reflexively point that out and say, this is great, and not just to be nice, but also 30 pages on, you'll come to a point that's, it's really not working. And then I can say, back on page 28, remember that bit where you did this and so, something like that will work here. And that seems to me a much better way to or at least that's a comfortable way. I don't want to be giving people bad news in sort of clipped fashion all day long. That, I would rather just go have a desk job than do that. I guess I still have a desk job, right? So yeah, but from my hourly rate point of view, I sometimes wish I were one of, there's a lot of really highly regarded developmental editors who don't do line editing as part of their gig and don't make very many comments in the margin, and they're able to read it and craft an editorial letter that writers find really helpful. And I don't know what I think about a book until I've gone through that exercise. I read it once purely as a reader, no notes, no nothing. And then my sort of reader's perspective stays in my head then. Then I go back and then I read, and then they get every thought that I have and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going on in the margins and all this, and get to the end. And then I go and fashion my editorial letter from, using those comments in the margins. And by the end of the letter, I know what I think about the book, but I'm not someone who can diagnose it and confidently give that diagnosis and walk away. I don't, I wish I could, because they make good coin, I would assume, so.
And when you're looking through something and you're reading a book, and how do you know what needs fixing, and how do you know what the fix is? Is that something which is just kind of instinctual, or is it just practice, or is it very obvious, or sometimes are you kind of stumped by how to fix something?
Yeah, when I'm sitting down to that, by the time I've read it through once, and then I'm involved in the nuts and bolts of it. I gotta say, maybe I don't like saying it, but I do, it is, it's my project in my head. I'm saying, well, what might make this work better, or I've already identified where my attention was wandering, or where I was unconvinced, or whatever it is. And so why is that happening? And then I kind of go at it.
Do you ever have, because I suppose there's a difference, potentially, I'm thinking anyway, between the writers that come to you through your website and get you to do work on their book, because they're sort of volunteering for that process in a way.
Right.
Whereas someone that's coming via a publisher, although they're volunteering in a different way, they're perhaps, I don't know, are some writers more protective of their work?
That's one reason that I love working with commercial fiction, genre fiction, particularly, the mystery suspense writers that I've worked with they're just a hardworking crew, and any help they can get is great, because they are imagining the next project. They are writing one project, they're rewriting the other one, they're publicizing the one ahead of that. And so it's moving. And if you want to have a career, it seems like you got to keep slogging at that. And so they don't, when I do work with people on literary fiction, and it's great, but it's their heart's blood, and here they are opening up, and they're trying to find the truth of the human condition, and sort of stake in there. When you write it on the page and you go, well, all right, this is how I see the world. And it's powerful. It's heavily freighted stuff. I was at another conference, and so I was the of editors, and so I was the representative of mystery fiction, crime fiction editors, and the woman next to me she specialized in literary fiction, and so she went first, and there were like four all different genres. It was fascinating, but it got to her, and she was saying, oh, I really am I'm the psychologist or pastor to the, and they come to me in tears all the time, and we work through their issues, and I get all involved in, and so I sit there, and she finally finishes it, and then it goes to me, and I said, well, I just realized that is why I very much love crime fiction or genre fiction, because there, I don't know, you don't know baseball, but there's this Tom Hanks movie, what's the one where he's League of Their Own. Yeah, so that there's no crying in baseball, and so that was the quote I gave them, that there's no crying in genre fiction. These people, yes, they care, and it's their craft, and they have their opinions, but and that's part of the reason I say so often, and I feel compelled to say so often, I'm just another guy with an opinion. I'm another reader, and for whatever good that, and even with when I'm working with publishers, really push for that. If you've seen me, if I've gone into the text and made changes, if you look at it and that doesn't make sense to you, just hit delete. I'm not going to argue with you about it.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to place that perspective in your mind. And if there's something you want to do with it, great. Otherwise, by all means, hit reject. And in a comment, once you've kind of sucked my wisdom out of that comment, we don't need to have a conversation in there arguing that point unless you really want to, and it's important to the book, by all means. Yeah, we do. But otherwise, you don't have to defend your choice to me or whatever. I've done my job giving it to you, and then so just delete that comment too. So
is there are there common things, are there common mistakes or errors that you see a lot of authors send you that you kind of, that you're routinely having to say this is a bad way of phrasing something, or this is a clumsy opening or something? Is there kind of stuff that you kind of think you just want to say this is a better way of doing something?
Sure. It really just depends on what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and the fact is, maybe more. I was going to say maybe more so with literary fiction, but I don't believe so. I mean, I think you kind of have to teach yourself how to write each book. It doesn't necessarily get all that much easier. I mean, maybe it does. You're making choices that are more inclined to work out as you go along and put your experience to work. But, even experienced authors, like feeling you have to warm up to something and load in that backstory. Well, that is all really essential stuff for you, thinking for you to have done and to learn about your characters and their histories. And this is in my own writing. I do this constantly where, okay, that doesn't really, that can be the iceberg stuff and ought to be the iceberg stuff. And it's so hard because you've worked it out, and that is, that's what really makes these people tick. But
I know, and when you're close to it as well, I think certainly I know exactly what you're talking about, and I often think, but if I take this out, how will any of that come through? They won't understand that. So, but then often you do take it out and it does work, but there's a mental block there, definitely.
And that is actually there's a really common thing, like independent authors, but even ones that have already been chosen for publication, and I'm working, the publisher's paying me. I just dropped into a hole there. What were we talking about?
About the iceberg thing and the mental
block,
stuff out.
Trust. Yeah. Like learning which is most of the time, to trust the reader. To figure something out. And at a really fine level, as an example, putting dialogue tags in, she said sarcastically, or, if the sarcasm's not evident, and it probably is, but if it isn't, it probably needs a little tweaking, and, the timing of the scene needs a little tweaking to make it clear that and that gets expanded out. And so a lot of that backstory, again, that's just it's so hard to know how to and when to put that stuff in there. And it's usually not interrupting the flow. I mean, and even if you're writing literary fiction or whatever, people want movement. It's not necessarily, a gunfight or action, but they want the character, your point of view characters. There has to be movement in his head where, she's making a change in or whatever, you know, and there needs to be, or a movement in the positions of characters in a scene. And so one is in the power position and the other is kind of scrambling, but then, oh no, now this has been, you know, and so that counts definitely as movement. Some of the, you know, it looks forbidding on the page. The densest literary fiction for me, once I get into it and get past that, crap, I don't want to read this. Once I get in there and sort of all the action in that character's mind does serve that function of, you know, there's electricity here or whatever. And so, but yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, have you ever encountered something where you've been sent something and you just can't think of the way to make the story work?
Right. Like fairly early on, and this was through a publisher. This woman had self-published a book or two, and they did really well. And this was back in the early days of self-publishing. So, you know, so the publisher picked her up, and rightly so. I mean, she's selling a kabillion books, and so I got the manuscript, and you know, I was still coming at it from the literary fiction sort of thing, but anyway, got the book, and it was, you know, I've never read a Dan Brown book, but it was in the Dan Brown mode, I'm told, and so just, you know, I was questioning, you know, I'm saying, well, I don't think that a helicopter can go like this and go between the buildings, and so I was, you know, and so I'm questioning all those things, and all the way through, and it was exhausting. And talk about a poor hourly rate, because, you know, I tend to get paid by the project. Crap, and so I worked it all the way through and sent off the edit, and almost never happens. The author got my phone number from the acquisition editor and called me up, and she was actually great. She said, David, I got your the manuscript, and the revisions. Says, I'm going to tell you, you know, I'm going to just sort of accept all of the language stuff, and but the rest, you know, I'm going to kind of, you're going to see, I'm not going to be making any of those changes, or you know, and says, and then she goes, so you think it's pretty stupid, don't you? And I went, oh, no, it's not stupid. It's David, my fans love stupid, was her quote. And that opened a door. I mean, I've run into a lot of authors who they know their public very well. Yeah. And they serve up exactly, and if they don't keep those fans, you know, and so, but to me, I'm sure there was just a long silence. You know, that my fans love stupid. Yeah, so a lot of times I will choose a 4 or 5 things that are sort of the big rocks in the stream, that, you know, well, if you're able to do this and this and not do that one thing, all of a sudden you've raised your game up to here. And that's good work, you know, and also to really give them a total breakdown of every, you know, for one thing, it'd be exhausting for me, and they wouldn't want to pay me to do it. And it would be so discouraging to get from them, and would be counterproductive. You know, so you got to kind of take it in bites, is the way I look at it.
And when it's a publishing house, a publisher giving you an author's manuscript, how long do you typically have, and how many passes between, you know, does the ball pass between you and the author a bit before it then moves on to that next stage.
Yeah. In my experience, it's a pretty tight schedule. For me, it would be daunting. And again, I think it helps to be working in genre fiction a bit, where you don't have to plumb your soul. You need to figure out how to get that train off the tracks there or whatever. But yeah, so it's like 6 to 8 week, process. And that includes time for me to do my first pass reading. Then it takes me a couple weeks, 2.5 weeks, depending on, some books are dauntingly large, but, or have a lot of issues. 2.5 weeks or so to do what I call the draft one edit. And then and compose the editorial letter. That goes to the author. They get it for like, say, 3 weeks. And they make their changes, keep track changes on, and they accept or reject the changes I've suggested, make their own changes that are then, they're all shown so that I can see them and track changes, get it back to me. And then I have that. It takes me, say, 3 days to do the draft 2 edit generally. And now the goal, because we have a finish line that is identified for us. And that's, it's horrifying, but on the other hand, it's awesome. Particularly early on, I'd be doing a very busy draft 1 edit and give it to the author, and I'd be going, man, I would not want to be on the receiving end of this. What would I do? And over again, the draft 2 would come back to me sooner. They would have lopped a week off of that schedule for getting it back to me. They're just drilled down. And a lot of some authors are so great at, I'll suggest a change or identify an issue or whatever, and it's just kind of a big deal. And I hope you're, and instead of, I know if I had gotten that, I would have gone to work at that and take a couple of months to work that out and add another 25,000 words to make that work. And these authors, it will be this elegant little adjustment here, or just because, no, you're right, I don't want readers thinking about this now, cut. It's gone. And it's a good thing. And I think it's usually a good thing even in literary fiction, go ahead and do all that wheel spinning in your head. Absolutely. And, but then think about the reader's experience and what your main thrust is, and having that hard deadline coming is great for that. And that's why a lot of like independent authors that come to me, I serve that function for them, and that's valuable in itself. Oh God, I need to turn this into this guy in March, and I am, and so they, it's like, I don't know if you guys we have this NaNoWriMo thing here. It's a National Novel Writing Month. And the advantage of that is, again, like all the literary fiction writers that I was in the MFA program with, they're just not productive writers. And they think they're working really hard, and they are not. They are not. They're not putting their butt in the chair and finishing this and sending it off. Let it take its lumps. Give it to a reader that you trust, but don't just sit there and chew it and try to make it perfect, because you won't. Look at the reader reviews on Amazon of any book that you love, that you would kill to have written, and a solid at least 30 and sometimes more percent, people
Just
are
absolutely
just
hate it.
disgusted
Yeah.
by this piece
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
junk,
Yeah.
so get it out there.
Yeah.
And, you might encounter an agent or an editor that's right in their wheelhouse. You just don't on that day,
Mhm.
and they decide, what, I'm going to fight for this, and really push and that's never going to happen if it's just sitting on your computer. And if you are, well, I got to get this one section right, it's driving me crazy. And so years pass, and
Yeah.
you're still not, and it's not all it can be. Well, yeah, but neither is the next one that you're not writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So easy to say all this, but
No,
kind
but
of have to say it over
it's
and
true, though.
over.
It's
it's
true.
definitely good advice, and yeah, it's something that I'm definitely guilty of as well. Is that you
Yeah.
can. I mean, we often ask our author guests, "How do you
Mhm.
know when it's finished?" And
Yeah.
it is, often they
hardest
do
thing,
say
I
it is
think.
because I know it's finished because I've got to send it in for the deadline. Essentially,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
got to move it
Oh,
on.
deadline's
So,
a great thing. I'm a
yeah.
big fan of it. Yeah. Without that,
Yeah.
as you say, you'd be tempted just to keep making it perfect until time runs
Right.
out.
Well, I mean, those were the main questions we had for you, David. But,
Okay.
we always end every podcast by asking our guests the same question.
Yeah.
The first of which is, what was the last book that you read? That isn't one that you read.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Once, with the pandemic, I finally made the move into getting audiobooks from
Yeah.
Nice.
yeah. And so, I'm gonna look at my list. Oh no, I can't. Anyway, it's embarrassing because I read a book by Michael Pollan. I'm in a Scotch club that's also a lowercase book club, group of guys, and some of these guys are very well heeled, and they collect Scotch, and so they invited me. So I always, I bring one bottle of Scotch, put it down, and they've each brought 4 or 5 of the really great stuff. And so it's one by Michael Pollan called "How to Change Your Mind," and it's about sort of what's going on in research now about using psychedelics in small doses or not so small doses for various reasons. And but it was terrific, and it wasn't. Yeah, that stuff. I'm too scared to do anything like LSD. What I love about that book club is that it makes me read nonfiction books,
Mhm.
and almost every time I read, I found so much that went right to my project that I'm working on now that was useful. A lot of stuff about psychology, and he's just a very amiable, articulate, knowledgeable guy, and kind of humble about what he doesn't know.
Mhm.
And so all this stuff that I hadn't really thought of before about mainly it was psychological stuff that all of a sudden I was getting all these ideas from that I could immediately apply to either what I'm editing at the time, even, or what I'm trying to write at the time. So yeah, so sorry. That was
Awesome.
No, cool.
the last book I read.
Very interesting. And what about the last film that you watched?
Well, let's see. We watched a film noir movie the other night that's the Strange Love of Martha Ivers. It stars Barbara Stanwyck. It's a classic noir, and my wife and I, every so often we have a list of, and we've kept, saved a lot of them on the DVR. And so we watched that, and it is definitely worth watching. And it, because we're old and tired, we watched the first half of it, and then we decided to pause it because we were starting to lose it. And but it was right at the halfway point, and realized that at first I seemed kind of stagey and old movie-ish. I mean, in a bad way, kind of obvious and weird. But it was like Kirk Douglas's first movie. He had a secondary role, but he kind of overpowered the movie as he would, right? And then Barbara Stanwyck and Elizabeth Scott. And so that was kind of the first half was kind of, but then right at the point that we were going away, I said, that might be a good place for us to just leave it, because everything was loaded then, all of them in opposition to each other, and the shit was going to hit the fan. And we stopped and then came back the next day. And sure enough, from then on, it was just a ride to the end, and a little over the top, but in a good noirish way. So I would highly recommend that one too.
Cool. And the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Let's see. Well, I went through the documentary of The Staircase, then the HBO treatment of that story. And that was kind of a workout, but and I love watching document. I do that a lot. I watch a documentary of something, and then I usually try to watch the dramatized thing first, and then I'll watch the documentary to see how they all the decisions they made. That's instructive too, right? So that was fascinating.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the documentary. I've not watched the drama version of it yet, but it's on my list to watch at some point.
Yeah, you ought to do it while the documentary.
Yeah, well, it's still in my head a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of them, before that, is kind of cheating to replace that dude with Colin Firth.
Yeah.
Who comes in with all of his, even when he's being off-putting and weird, you still call him Colin Firth, right? Got that charm going for him, and the other guy did not have that.
No, he definitely didn't
quiver. Yeah.
Well, the very final thing we always do is a quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answer apart from one. So we'll start off with TV or cinema.
Yeah, I mean, these days, I guess it'd have to be TV. I can barely remember what cinema's like. I love going, in a perfect world, it would be cinema. But can hardly remember that perfect world, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Night owl or early bird?
Kind of disastrously both. So I stay up too late and get up too early. And, as I'm 63 now, and I am, every once in a while I can get myself to nap during the day, and always really glad I did. If you don't, it's like a 20-minute, like a whole new day, but I just can't get myself to do it very often. But yeah, it's both for me.
That's fair enough. Music or no music when you're editing or writing?
Music. Yeah, and I can't have, I can't have lyrics going, I can't, or they can be, lyrics I know I don't have to pay attention to, as part of the sonic landscape or whatever. But definitely, I got a thing from Spotify that said that I was like in the 97th percentile of that's how much I listen to Spotify. And and I've always stayed, I have a good friend here in town, and we are the old dudes at the concerts with the young people all the time. And hey kids, and so stayed up with new music, which, by now it's, and have been since high school. So for me, that was 76 that I graduated from high school. So that's a lot of music to swim through.
Good effort.
Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Takeaway. Yeah, I definitely that's sort of what we have always done for fun, but even that is go out to eat. And Seattle has, a lot of good dining options, and that's one of the things that we love about it. But even then, we prefer, where you can get away with just wearing a shirt and
exactly.
In front of the TV.
Good food, but not, yeah.
And the very last one is real book or ebook.
I say real book, and I often, what I do now, like right now, I read this really good book about Dostoevsky, because I'm pretty impressive, and it's about Dostoevsky. So it's kind of a biography of him, but it's also about the writing of Crime and Punishment. And the book is also about the historical French case that sort of inspired that.
Okay.
Cool. And so I read really good reviews of it, and it earned it. It was Sinner and the Saint is the name of the book. Really good, super readable, interesting book. And then I often have done this over the years, is that I'll then kind of pair that with, once it starts talking about the composition of the book, then I start reading the book. And so this is rereading Crime and Punishment. And there's this new British guy, Oliver Reedy, has done it. And it's a very accessible, lively, if you can imagine that, translation of Crime and Punishment, where there really is, I read the reviews of it, there really is humor. He didn't know that was in there. And it's a lot of really legitimately shocking, creepy stuff in there. And so reading that along with it. And so for both those books, I got the hardcover from the library. I bought the hardcover of the Crime and Punishment. And I have the audio book of it, and I have the ebook from the library of all of them.
You just everything, just every
if I'm out walking, I'm moving through it. Before I go to bed at night, so I don't keep my wife up, I have the ebook. Kindle. And so I really do. It's now become. It doesn't really, and that usually sometimes, I really need the hardcover of this. I've hardly opened a hardcover time after time, and I'm always reading on my phone. I read it for like the editing I do.
Yeah.
I read everything on, like my first reading through, it's on my phone. Yeah. And the idea, if you had told me that I would be doing that years ago, and then when I tell a lot of people that, they're horrified at that. But, the fact is, you can adjust the font size on the phone. And when you get a little paperback of a book, like the mass market ones we used to read, I can't believe we used to read those, so the tiny. Yeah. So anyway.
Perfect.
We've often said that it would be good if books, you could buy the hardcover and you got all the other versions with it.
Yeah, exactly. You should throw the ebook in with the hardcover. It'd make me spend
and the
money
audio
to buy
book would be amazing.
And the audio book.
Yeah, and that's I love our library
and
system.
Sync up and everything. Yeah, no, it's great.
Because you can, almost all of them you can get in different forms of even pretty new stuff. So so now I've become whatever the ambidextrous, whatever, multimodal, I don't know. Yeah. It really doesn't matter for me.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, that was great.
Yeah, thanks very much, David.
Thanks very much, David. That was really interesting.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.